So welcome class, this is Visa 137, Introductory to Art, and today I've got a really great treat for everybody. We're going to have a conversation with a really lovely human who is the author of this fantastic book, The Private Eye in Public Art. Joyce Pomeroy Schwartz joins us from New York City, from Manhattan today, so thank you so much, Joyce, for joining us. Did you want to give us a little bit of an introduction to yourself and your history, your personal history, and how you came to the book?
Well, I was always interested in art. Grew up in Brooklyn and went to the Brooklyn Museum, and it was my education starting as a very young woman. My mother would drop me off when I was about 8 or 9 years old at the museum to spend every Saturday. We lived in the Rockaways. We started the Rockaway Music and Arts Council, which was the second arts council in New York State, to bring art to the community. So I always was interested in bringing art to a larger public, not just to an art public. And so it almost like fell into my life when I started to work at Pace Gallery. My husband said, go get a job and stop crying about that you have nothing to do when my children got a little bit older. So Pace offered me a job, but it turned out that some of the artists that they had really wanted to do public art, notably Louise Nevelson, who always saw her art as installations and saw herself in public spaces. And she encouraged me. And I remember speaking to Arnie Glimcher and Billy, who were the head of the Pace Gallery, and saying that public art was becoming something. The GSA had revived, the government, federal government, revived the WPA, which is the Works Progress Administration of the 30s. So there was always an interest in public art in America, and we just kind of let it lapse. But a young man, Don Thalica, an architect, said, oh, we did it once, we can do it again. And I was there for over 10 years working with Pace artists until I decided it was time to open up my own world and go beyond. And I developed a good file on artists who wanted to do public art and who I felt could be doing and should be doing it. And it turns out, fast forward many years later, New York University now has my whole collection of papers and artwork. So they have in their special collections.
And you had mentioned two things. I was wondering if you could kind of expand on what the first is. The GSA and the WPA. Would you mind kind of just explaining those a little bit?
Yes. Well, when Franklin Roosevelt was in the middle of our depression here, he realized, he said that artists have to be given work and the cities and states can benefit public buildings, so that he would commission artists who were established artists, who were professional, who were recognized of all ages and stages of their art, to do projects in public places. And that went on through the 30s and 40s and 50s. And then it kind of stopped. New people came in and they started to do new things. But in the late 1960s, the GSA, which is the government building program, decided they wanted to upscale their architecture. So they started a new architecture program. And among the architects was a young man called Donald Thalica. And when he heard about the WPA project that was now defunct, he said, why don't we do this and bring it back? And in front of every government building, we're going to put an artwork. And that's what started. And it still is going on. But it was this young man, Don Thalica, who gave it a real push and set it on a very high level. And he would call me, and say, I'm doing this project. Can you recommend an artist? So he had the people that he felt were knowledgeable about communities and about artists. He felt public art should be the best art that our communities could offer, and because they were art for everybody. And that's how it started. And I really blame him. And unfortunately, he did pass away, but he spent a few great years and got it started. And we did public art. And that's where I really got myself started. And it became a life activity.
Yeah, something that you came to, and then it kind of grew and grew and kind of built up.
Right. Sometimes things happen by accident and you have to be ready to jump on them.
Yeah, totally. I have a friend that would say that an opportunity is just the measure of your preparedness. That without being prepared in your life for what you're interested in, there are no opportunities because opportunity is met with, your desire and your preparedness to do things.
Right. And
Yeah.
you're willing to jump in and to get better prepared.
Yeah, totally. And it does take, well, this is one thing that I think is a really great theme throughout your book as you're talking, as you lay out the whole history through your book, which is really well written and really lovely to follow through the history and things like that. There's
Thank you.
one kind of follow through or one kind of thread that really kind of spoke to me, which was the care and the importance of care in the community and the importance of the community and the members of that community to come together to make something more. And it's this idea of synergy that 1+1 isn't 2, but that 1+1 comes and makes 3, makes 4. It's very a generative process when everyone comes together.
Yeah, well, public art does use committees, and you want to have committees that are knowledgeable, but also open to listening to other people. But I had a system so that we would always say we wanted to give the best art. And it wasn't about, helping friends out.
Right.
It was about the community, no matter where it was, no matter how small the city. They deserve the best art that artists can do.
This idea of defining a national culture through a national identity through the culture of art. I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but could you speak to that a little bit?
Well, I'm a world traveler, and as I got older and older, I traveled more and more. And you travel to cities, and you visit the museums because they are the collections of the past of most cities. So you are seeing the arts, you are seeing the things that people want to save, that identify their city. And very often it is the art. And it started with public art. In other words, we now talk about public art as coming out of the art world. But in those times, in the earlier times, it was art that was in churches and in public buildings or on the public streets that was the first art that we had 5,000 years ago. And that's the art we remember. Just think of the Greek and Roman temples that we all still go to visit, and they're in ruins now. Uh, so that art lasts when it's worth looking at. And people are preserving the art that made their city unique or their village unique. And so we can't dismiss the arts as being a frill. It's underlying all of our cultures and our lives and our pasts.
The idea of art for all people and how art is embedded in the culture of everything. And it's not just a specialized few that are engaged or surrounded by art, but we all are.
Right.
And this has been a theme that we've been talking about so far this semester. And it's kind of how I'm grounding the overarching theme of the lectures as well, is that this is, art is the beginning of our kind of cultural markers, our togetherness. And this is what we bring forward as value. So as you said, traveling around, and I do the same when I travel, I go places, and the first thing I'm doing is I'm going to the public monuments, the areas of the history, the museums, and these are the things that are preserved and the thing that make those places so unique. When you, like you said, you go to the pyramids, or you go to you go to the Louvre, you go to these places that are full of history and full of creative activities and culture. And then the idea of a new city, a new country. I mean, although obviously North America's been here for as long as any land, and the people have been here for very long, but the idea of the past couple hundred years of America becoming the United States of America and having its own unique cultural identity that is made through art and identifiable through art is, like you said, we almost imagine that it's coming out of the art world, but it's always been the process. So
Right.
it's really neat to hear you talk about approaching public art as a way of actively creating and cultivating a national identity. I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah, well, we realize that when we go into a city, we are traveling to it, and we're going either through the airports, or it used to be only through their train stations. And those were the places that the city would put their best public art. They wanted to identify their city as unique to that city. And the way you do it is just asking artists to make something that will be memorable and noticeable. And so that is how art started. And it's still, interestingly enough, even today, where we have public art for many reasons in many ways, it's transportation has become the place where we see the unique art of any particular city. And I've done more projects in airports and train stations than any place else, which we understand and is cool, or the town square.
Yeah, of
We
course.
also did in America have, we wanted to revitalize cities when we had lost a lot of our cities after the Depression and during the World War, so that they had a program, the government had a program to put a signature work of art in a city to identify it. And the federal government gave $50,000 to cities they were supposed to match, so they would have $100,000 to build a really the right work of art, not just kind of ditzy little thing, but something memorable.
We spoke about the idea of placemaking, and that was a term that you use,
Right.
I think it's a concise, it's simple, but it really is kind of takes into part so much of the activity you're talking about.
Right. I think placemaking is really what public art does for a city. And the artists who want to do it see their work as beyond a work of art that they're just dropping in a space, and it doesn't matter what the space is. They buy into the space, the place that it makes, the city that it's in, the culture that it's in. So the artist is using the background as a place, a way to develop their artwork.
I think a key thing to remember too for me when I'm sharing with my students is this idea that the process of thinking and the idea of placemaking is not a sidebar, but it's the central activity. You know,
So the
just
larger the committee, it seems like it could be a problem, but in a funny way, it opens up the community. And I've worked with committees as much as 30 people.
yeah,
Ultimately, it's the quality of the art that's left that the city needs. And so that should always be our goal.
exactly. What people will encounter for years after with that idea of place is the product. And that product hopefully is successful and reflects the community and the artist's needs and all coming together.
And there is no question that as you go through the world, certain cities you realize did the right thing, and their cities reflect an art city. You want the committee to ultimately get the best art for their community.
So what is a percent for art?
Oh, well, usually a city or a state will leave a percentage for art when they're doing a new project. It's usually 1 or 2%. Europe is a little more generous than we are, and most of their cities are at least 2% for a work of city art. They're putting up a new building and they say 2% of the cost of the building should go to
Okay.
art.
Yeah, it's really cool to see the impact that a movement like that is by,
Oh,
you
there's
know,
no
because
question.
buildings
The
are going up.
WPA
Yeah,
was major in getting us to even think about putting art in cities. And even though it went down for a couple of years, it was brought back. Yeah, and that has built the whole art program throughout our country. It was started with the WPA, giving a percent for art in federal buildings, and then cities started their own art program to put their money into city projects. And then they even, in some cities, they encouraged private developers or insisted that private developers put a certain percentage in. And they made it a rule because the art became something that cities wanted.
the city I live in now in Kelowna, it's a much smaller city as we were talking yesterday. Um, there's not a percent for art in place. And when we presented there's a lot of talk because there's so much growth. We're one of the fastest growing cities in Canada. There's so much growth and there's so much development. This was one of the suggestions, and I shared the book, which was great. We had a public art for the city. We had a new public art committee developed, growing the city with its art collection so that they grow in tandem and they have meaning that's built right in.
Yeah, and it doesn't hurt to get ideas from other cities that did it well. Just once you start thinking about what art means to the cities that you're visiting, then you realize I want home too.
Yeah, and you realize that's why you're going to these places. That's why these other places seem so desirable. It's literally because they're investing in the core values of art and culture. Are there any particular projects of yours that you're particularly proud of or really interested in sharing at all?
One project that I'm particularly proud of is the Irish Hunger Memorial downtown. The first thing that I realized is that all over the country, there were many Irish hunger memorials, and they all had hungry men and children. So they were doing sort of the obvious thing. And I said, the first thing we should do is maybe broaden what we are thinking of the Irish Hunger Memorial. We opened up the committee and the thinking. And we thought about the landscape that they really want. People would kept on telling me they wanted to bring a piece of the old sod. Well, okay, let's go back and see what that old sod looked like. And we actually sent a landscape architect, Gail Whitwer, who was the landscape architect who we selected to work with us, back to Ireland. She went and got seeds from old plants that would grow in Ireland. And that's what's growing here. We grew them here in a greenhouse just by changing a little bit of the thought of what makes a memorial from hungry women and children to the whole idea of people leaving their land and their landscape. And then we even got a cottage that some family gave us from the Irish with the roof off. I think if you took your roof off, then they would let you come into a place where they would feed you. Ireland. I went to visit Slieve Moor when I went to visit Ireland, and we saw a whole city, a little city with roofs off that was deserted and was kind of like in itself a monument.
Oh, that's
so that was the memory I thought was more interesting than a picture of somebody looking like they're hungry. So that we thought words would matter. So we collected a lot of words, and the artist, Brian Tolle, who was a young artist, and he went to Ireland. We made all of the artists who were competing go to Ireland and actually see Western Ireland where there were still things left over. And there were these cottages left over. So we had somebody who said, I can give you the cottage. My family owns it. And that's why we brought a cottage there, but we also had the plants was there. And so we tried to encompass a lot of ideas in the memorial. And by the way, the reason why I mentioned it, it has now become a historic landmark that people coming from Ireland or Irish background want to go to see.
And it feels like a park. It feels like when you go,
it feels like a park. You climb up it and it grows, and the landscape keeps on changing. And it does have words in it, and it has a house on it, an actual real house
from Ireland,
from Ireland,
and the rock wall and the grasses. It really feels like it's a piece of Ireland, like a park.
Well, that's exactly what someone wanted when we had the Irish committee. They said we want as a piece of Ireland there. Right. Well, it's certainly looking back at the Statue of Liberty, which became the symbol of welcoming to any people who was escaping anything. And we have communities all over that represent where the people came from. They didn't just become anonymous people, anything. They were able to maintain their cultural background and yet be American. And of course, what happened in the middle of the Irish Hunger Memorial being built was the World Trade Center coming down.
Right.
And so that gave another identity to it, because most of the police and the firemen were of Irish derivation. So it became something that they would come over to the site where it was going on. it became something very special for all those people. And they rushed to get it through because they felt it would help build up the area. So things take on, its own strengths and reasoning even beyond what you think.
What you imagine, the good intent that you imagine can grow in so
Right,
many unimaginable ways.
right. And this one did, and it still has, growth to go.
You've worked on quite a few big projects. Maya Lin piece. What?
Another one that was complicated.
Yeah, that one is another really, and like we talk about placemaking again, and these are like actually places in themselves. The monuments are not just objects in places, but rather they are the whole architecture, the landscape is all the monument, the art itself.
Well, when you listen to the artist, and it was really a funny story. They picked her because the city of Grand Rapids had a cauldre, and they were a very traditional city. And when they first put a red cauldre up in the center of the city, people said, "Oh, that doesn't look like a sculpture," and they wanted something very traditional. But it became so that after just 2 or 3 years of having the cauldre there, it identified the city of Grand Rapids. They put a little model in the airport, so when people come in, it appears on their stationery. It became the symbol of the city. But at any rate, the Grand Rapids wanted to bring back the city, and they loved, because everybody had heard of Maya Lin because she had done the Vietnam Memorial, so they picked her immediately. She was the artist they wanted. And Maya didn't even know we were considering her because that was my system. I had, we picked 3 artists. She became the first one. She was the one that was going to get the project. And when we took the committee to visit her, and we said, we want another, memorial or something exciting for the city to identify. She says, I don't do memorials anymore. She said, I'm now into ecology. I'm interested now in saving the world and trees and things. So it turns out that while we had the committee meeting, the committee reminded me, as a person working there, that every winter they would freeze the center of the city. They would just throw some water and have an ice skating rink. And people were coming in. And I said, oh, she wants to do something with water. Maybe we could do an ice skating rink. Oh, she said, that's fabulous. And so that's how that evolved, that they were going to revitalize the city, but the centerpiece would be an ice skating rink. And then in the summer, they had a place where you could have performances. We would make it more about nature. So there would be steam, water, and ice. And that was what it was. So we had steam fountains, water fountains, and of course the ice skating rink. And they decided that under the ice skating rink, they would make a light sculpture.
We talked about early on this idea that when artists are working in public art, that it's really like it's a practice that has its own unique palette. It has its own unique
Absolutely.
concerns. And both the projects we just talked about, other than being fantastically large in scale and complex, they are also really remarkable because the artists are so present in the work themselves. Like they're and it's so reflective of the space. They fit well. They have that dynamism, as if a sculpture, when working with a particular clay, feels it from all sides and knows the work inside and out. And every decision is so important. We see these in these large scale projects where the consideration of where the trees are placed, the elevation of the hill, the way the benches come around, where the lights are placed, how it transforms season to season.
Well, the artist has to know what they're doing as
Yeah,
builders and as landscapers, but they also have to be conceptual. They have to.
Because they're not just a stand-in for creative landscape architects. They're working with landscape architects. They're really a different role. The artist still occupies this conceptual.
The idea is there, right?
Yeah, Totally. And that's really the center that brings all these ingredients together. It's the purpose for the whole recipe is this artistic expression. And then that's what makes it so interesting. It's not just good design where you walk around and it feels good. It actually draws you in. There's something magical to that.
No, and these artists both are working from themselves. I mean, Brian Tolle, when he's working for history, that's one of the reasons he got picked, because history of space and place is what his art is all about.
Exactly.
It's the concept behind most of his artworks. So he was the right person to do that. And he was the only one that made that commitment. We had 5 artists and they all did interesting things. They all were about place,
Yeah.
but his hit on the history behind the Irish Hunger Memorial that really spoke to the people on the committee. We had 30 people on the committee. So it's fun, and it really makes public art me very, very real, because I think these projects do have a life beyond what they are, that they speak to many people.
I like
And
that.
it's not a matter of, I've heard people tell me, oh, they'll never understand that art, it's too complicated. That is really not a true thing. People understand art. It speaks to people on many levels, and if it's really right, it speaks to them. They don't have to know about what makes it art.
What draws me so much to art is exactly its ability to speak to everybody.
To speak to everybody. I worked in Charlotte, North Carolina, and they didn't have enough money in the budget. They putting up a new building to say we can put a permanent work of public art. So they had to find the budget somewhere else. So they said, oh, we could do a show. And at first I said, we can do 2 shows a year and I will help pick the artists and we'll find the places. And they said, well, 2 shows, that's a lot. Maybe we should do only 1 show a year. It takes them a year to get used to the art. And 6 months is not enough. And a year was enough for them to decide, I like this one, or this one speaks to me, or this one doesn't. And it really was one of the best things that I've done. And we did a whole series. We did 10 shows until they sold the building. But every year we did another show, and we would find large scale works of art, because it was public spaces, outside, inside. We had a theme every year. And we changed all the art, but the works had to work within the spaces that we had. It was interesting to see how in the same spaces, different artworks worked.
But still, 10 years, the idea of placemaking when you have one work that's there for 10 years, and like we've talked about the Irish Hunger Monument, it does a certain kind of service to identifying and creating that sense of space. But then you have something different where you're like, this place, the city, is actually the host of these art shows that are ongoing and changing. So it has a different draw and a different kind of identity that comes from that.
Absolutely.
And then when people are coming, they're actually coming to expect to see something new in a spot they'd seen something before. And in that, there's actually a really big, like you said, this idea that by being around art for a long period of time, for a year, seeing it and breathing it and becoming accustomed
able to have an opinion about it.
Yeah, and really coming
then
to
it would go away and we'd put something else in the space.
Yeah, and then you'd come back to it. But it gave people, and I would imagine it would have given people an opportunity to understand themselves within the reflection of that artwork, because they're like, oh, I like these kinds of artworks and I don't like those kinds of artworks. And the reason I like these kinds of artworks is, and that awareness and that navigation for individuals, that new experience, it is something that is invaluable in a community to having people's appreciation.
I think it was really one of the most interesting things I've done to,
yeah, that's a really cool one.
Spaces.
Because it's really quite different than the other works that are permanently there.
That are permanent, yeah.
Yeah. Artists that are making work in public spaces that you became friends with for a long time, and you've seen their work grow.
Yeah, well, Louise I worked with because she was at Pace Gallery, and she's the one who really got me involved in public art.
Right.
She wanted to do public art. And so we became friends because I was the one who was taking out all these projects. We had to visit the projects, look for stuff. So that's how you get to know the artist when you're doing something. It's not like a painting that you put on the wall and somebody buys it or doesn't buy it. You get involved with the process. And so I do get to know the artists that I work with.
And that helps
And
you speak their
it's a good
language.
example. Yeah, it helps me to understand them and to also give them the freedom to be who they are. And they know who they are. So the artists I work with know exactly who they are. And
You
you
mentioned
know,
the idea of when you would have a project that you would go and look for artists specifically, like the ones that you felt had, strong voices that would work for different projects over time.
yeah, well, a project sort of gives those certain vibes. And
Yeah.
I do have a file. You see, I have this artist file. So I have hundreds of artists in the file, and I know who they are, and I have their slides. So when I'm doing something, I might collect 100 different artists to first show the committee. And I pick the artist that it seems to me would have some relationship to a particular project, usually tenuous. But as you begin to talk about it and work with it and work with the committee, it begins to become apparent who can better express that idea than other artists. And the committee works out, and it's a process, and it works.
And then it slowly refines to getting that
And
person
then
in
you
the right
finally pick
place.
the artist, right?
Yeah. One of the things I was interested in, because you talk about your own personal history in the book a little bit, and we've talked about it, and you talk about how impactful going to the museums was as a young person. Was it ever your aspiration to become an artist, a painter, a sculptor, a dancer?
Uh, well, an artist. I really thought I would become an artist. And when I was in college, I realized in trying to make art, I never could find my own voice. And all the artists that I was looking at that I admired had their own voice. And I somehow was not one of those artists. Now, maybe I'm a different kind of personality. I was caught up. I had 3 children. I got married very, very young. So, that affects you too.
It's interesting to talk about those things as kind of a central point and a contributing factor because it really speaks to the idea of the level of commitment that people are making and engaging with.
Because they just, in order to be the artists they are and they have become, that has to be their main thought. And their families have to just, I think, understand that.
We brought your book in last year for the reference library at our school in fine arts in our fine arts library at UBC, and so I went in and took it out from the library just so I could bring it out and show everybody a photograph of it on the shelf and being like, "This is the book we're looking at for this assignment." And so it's like it's really cool, really really cool. Congratulations, also.
Yeah, well, let's do it again because I'm happy
Yeah.
to talk to you and
Oh,
it's
I love
fun.
it. It's just been
Okay.
fantastic. Thank you so much, Joyce. You're so
Okay,
gracious.
thank you.
We'll talk
Bye-bye.
soon.